It's 1:20. We'll start on time. They're starting. We're going to start. Yep. Can everyone hear me okay? If you cannot hear me okay, raise your hand. Okay, that means you can. But you can't. Are you heckling me? Okay, well, can we make this louder? Do I have to? Oh, I think that worked. That's good? Okay. All right. Thank you guys for joining. Great to see you. My name is Christie Grabyan. I work at Stack & Lew, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about me and my company so you know my perspective. So we're a security consulting firm. We have two different consulting practices. One of them is an assessment and penetration testing practice, and then the other is what we call enterprise security, and I lead the enterprise security practice. And that's similar to how these tracks at the conference are divided as breaking and building. My practice is the building practice, is how to set things up right, how to configure things correctly, have the right defensive controls in place. And so that's kind of the perspective that I'll be sharing. I also flew in from Atlanta this morning. I woke up at the equivalent of 2 a.m. Pacific time. So bear with me if I just kind of get schizo. All right. So actually, before I go to the next slide, this could be a very wide topic as far as startups. When I say startup, I'm going to use a case study to illustrate a company that I've worked with of a certain size and type and scale. Obviously, startups can be 2 people to 500 people. So who in this room currently works for what they would call a startup? Yeah, okay. How many of them are 25 people or less? Okay, a couple, 3. How many are in 50 people or less? 100 or less? Well, I guess I should do that the other way around. But how about between 100 and 200? Okay, and then leapfrogging from there up to 500? Okay, so we have the whole spectrum here. I myself, over the last year, have worked with about 4 different startups, and they've been across that spectrum as well, up to 350 people and down to about 10 people. So what I'm going to use again is just a case study, but I want your questions and feedback, and we can even debate. I'd be happy to debate, why I'm saying something. And also, I am though, no matter what the size. My focus here is a startup that would be, a growth-based company. It could be self-funded or it could be investor-funded, and there would be some different strategies for both. But that's the kind of startup I'm talking about. Not like just, a couple guys in the garage doing something as a hobby to make money on the side. They're not going to need to think about these types of things. All right. So I made up a name for a real company because I can't share their name. And I'm not very creative with names, so I called it Analyze This. So this is kind of a profile of a pretend/real company. So imagine a company that's self-funded, has been around for about 1.5 years, now has 25 employees in the US, India, and the UK. They develop a data analytics product, so kind of getting into that what to do with big data problem and how do you aggregate and analyze data from different sources. They host their infrastructure on AWS, and it's accessed by their clients via the web, on the web front end. Now, their customers, they have 25 people. Their customers are big companies, and their main customer, the one that's really helped them grow in the last 1.5 years, is, I don't know which X100, but it's a Fortune X100 in the Fortune 100 to 500 size company. And how they want to grow, their business strategy is to provide the same service, expand their product set to competitors within the same industry of their current customer. That's their growth plan. And they make money by doing some customized consulting and customizing their product as well to what the client wants, and doing licensing to say you want a number of people who can access this data, and doing a subscription-based service. So if you can imagine this company I actually would like to see, I know it's going to be kind of hard maybe to hear you guys, but are there any really big, immediate security concerns that you can imagine they'd have to deal with? Anyone want to just shout? What's that? IP theft, yep. The IP being their source code mostly?
International laws. Yes, source code and whatnot.
Right, source code of the product. International laws with the employees in different physical places. The CEO being put in prison? Okay, fair enough. Anything else?
Losing the data.
The data?
They're analyzing.
Losing it? Is that what you said? Okay. Yeah. What's that?
Keeping their customers' data segregated.
Yes, that's a great one. Keeping their customers' data segregated. They're different customers once they start to take on competitors. Yep. Absolutely. Those are all great answers, and there's a ton of things that they have to think about. So what I'll start to get into is, let's see if there's anything else I want to mention. Well, just a few other things to mention as well. Their application is mostly done in PHP and some Java, and they also, just so you know, and they use MySQL for databases, and they use stuff like GitHub. They use Google for their email. You know, all these kind of like let's use cloud-based services. They're using them all. So give some context as well. So what do they have to worry about? This is a list of security controls, domains, categories, whatever you want to call them. It's one that we use a lot with our clients. It's agnostic to any frameworks, but you could map it to multiple frameworks. And there's overlap, so you know, we came up with this structure. It works for us. But my point is, they have a lot of things to worry about with security, and the message is you can run, but you can't hide. They will eventually catch up to you if you ignore them now. So it's really important to think about these different categories. No matter how tiny of a company you are, you have to have an answer. If you have a customer or an investor ask you what you're doing about how to protect your data or your infrastructure, and you just kind of say, well, I didn't really think about that yet, or it's not a problem, don't worry about it, you're already starting off on the wrong foot, and you're setting yourself up to make mistakes and to cost yourself more time and money later on, which seems, I think for most of us who are security-minded, somewhat intuitive, but we have to speak that language to other people as well. So just to give you some context about what I mean about these categories, when I say security governance, I do mean documentation and responsibility. You have to have stuff written down somewhere. I don't care where, somewhere. And you have to have people assigned to certain functions. That's just a basic, right? So I mean, again, if you were a mature company, you'd have like 100 different things off this list. I'm trying to just minimize it down to the heart of what these things really are trying to get at. For asset management, what do you have and where is it? If you can't answer that simple question about your hardware, your software, and your data, you're in trouble. Configuration management, well, just as a tip, use standard, published, secure configuration guides. You don't have to be a genius to figure it out. Just use them, and you're already doing better than saying, oh, I don't know, I didn't want to mess it up, I didn't want to screw up our product, whatever it might be. Secure design, this is all of our favorite part. You know, secure coding practices, you know, testing, scanning. There's no excuse to not do some of those things. And I'll get to some specifics in a bit. Identity and access management, password length, what are you going to enforce? How are you going to manage your accounts for your employees, even if they're on Google or GitHub, whatever they're on? You have to have a plan for that. You have to think about that. Ops management, do you even have a systems administrator? Or do you have 10 developers who say, oh, we all kind of just figure it out when stuff comes up? Do you have someone whose role is to manage and support your infrastructure. And then security incident management. How are you going to figure out when shit hits the fan, and what are you going to do about it? Because it will at some point. Doesn't mean you're going to get breached, but stuff will go wrong, and you're going to need to have a plan to figure it out. Physical security, not too much of an emphasis, but if you don't even have locks on your doors and aren't even kind of thinking about, well, maybe our sensitive data that's in our office should always be on encrypted drive, so that if it does get broken into, at least the drive itself might have that level of security. Just kind of thinking through that. And then business continuity. What can you do without? And for how long can you do without that? And if you think about that, you can kind of figure out what's the appropriate level of business continuity or DR to plan out. So all of these things are topics that even if you're in a small company and someone is a CIO or a CTO and you don't have anyone who's actually focused on security, these are still things they need to think about and have a plan or a response to. The level of formality and granularity of what you produce will change as you grow over time. Are there any questions? I mean, this is very high level, so there's a lot of possible subdivisions and subcategories, and I'm not putting everything up on the slide. Is there any big thing that you think is missing? What's that? Compliance? Yeah, so compliance would fall under security governance, absolutely. That's where you would have your risk management, whatever you do for risk management, compliance if you have it, your training for your employees. That's kind of all in that, how do you govern and manage your security. Yep.
How do I limit bureaucracies to be agile and make money when everybody's trying to cut the margins as small as they can?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because that's actually where startups, I think, have a benefit, because they don't have excess bureaucracy to begin with, and they themselves are more agile and can implement changes quicker. And as long as you have, I mean, I'm a proponent of have a process and have a plan. At the beginning, it can be rough and it can be manual. That's fine. Over time, when needs arise, you can mature it, you can make it automated, you can put in tools, you can, but you have to start with something, and starting with something doesn't take that much effort.
So if I had a boilerplate plan, I could use it for any of the cloud companies that are doing this.
If you had a boilerplate plan, you could use it for the cloud companies. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, there's actually some good, even for the cloud services, there are some pretty good standards out there, mostly by Cloud Security Alliance, about things to think about when you're using cloud-based services. If they're your vendor, like what sort of things you think about is their responsibility versus your responsibility. Ryan?
Are you doing strictly operational? There's also vetting employees, or SDLC would be
Yeah, so SDLC would be in secure design. It's kind of a subcategory of secure design, absolutely. Vetting employees in terms of background checks, or what do you mean? Yep. I see that up here at security governance. We put organizational security and human resources security up there as well. Again, this is a framework that we use, and we have subcategories to it, but I wasn't trying to push my framework down your throat. But yeah, absolutely, it fits into there. Okay, so this is conceptually the areas to think about, regardless of what company you are, but I am going to use my case study as an example. But to the point about kind of being agile, not having bureaucracy, startups, there's pros and cons, and I think you already have a little bit of a head start because you have that clean slate, and so you have the opportunity to bake in security from the beginning, even in its smallest little forms and minimalistic little processes. If you start to build that culture from the beginning, it'll be much easier later on. But and that again sounds intuitive, but take the opportunity to do it now. Otherwise, you're going to end up with that death by 1,000 cuts issue where a problem that you didn't fix early on, we'll just deal with it. I'll just know to manually change that every time. When you're 100 people and 200 people, it's not going to work, and that's going to be the last thing that you want to go back and re-engineer. Also, root cause analysis and remediation. I was thinking about this particularly from the perspective of some of the pen testing we do and some of the SDLC work that we do. When you have a smaller team, the code is fairly new. It's a lot easier to when you see vulnerabilities and you see patterns, it's easier to figure out, you know who did that code and that guy still works for you and you can go talk to him. But you have that, it's easier to figure out where the root causes of your initial security problems are, which also means it's easier to fix them because you can go to them and you can use that opportunity to do appropriate training, put things in place with that team, build up a culture to prevent those things from happening again. And I mean, this might be too bold of a statement, but basically I said no such thing as a legacy system. You get to buy all new toys. So you don't, I mean, especially for those of you who have worked or do work for large companies, you know how painful it is that you can't move to a new protocol or technology because you have the system from 20 years ago that no one wants to replace, they won't give you the money, and it's just a thorn in your side. You don't have that excuse when you're a startup. So, you know, I'm just saying that's a pro. You have that on your side. And then this might not be true for all companies, but security can be a differentiator for you. Now, I'm assuming, I mean, there are obviously security product startups, which is its own thing. But if you're trying to play against other startups, you're competing for the same market share, like maybe B2B type of services, if you can come to the table with answers about what you're doing about security, and these other startups are just, you know, guys who say, oh, our product works, it's cool, look at all these, you know, features, it will be a differentiator. I mean, it shouldn't have to be, and at larger companies, it isn't. It's a minimum baseline. But for startups, you can use that to your advantage competitively. And you know, Salesforce is a good example of this, where they are very public on their website about what they do for security. And they use that as a, look, this is what we are doing with your data. This is how we protect it. This is what we expect of our business partners and our vendors. And you are putting yourself out there a little bit as a target when you do that. But if you're confident in what you put in place, it can be worth it because people recognize that. Now, the harder part is you're under really tight timelines. You're trying to get through to a beta product or your next release, your next round of funding. You have less people, particularly less people to provide oversight. It's really easy for me to stand up here and say, write policies and write processes and put in tools, and you're like, who's going to do that? So that is a very real challenge. And then also, people in this room of a security mindset might kind of feel that they're the only one who really understands security in their company, and might feel like they're the kind of the lone wolf who's like, I'm trying, but no one's listening to me. And at least in larger organizations, you still might have barriers and executive barriers and budget barriers, but there's usually more people who are willing to discuss what your appetite is to take on certain risks. So I think those are some of the challenges, you know, pros and cons if you're a startup. So here are some key questions. I'm not saying that these are the top three, but these are very relevant three questions. Who are your customers? Are your customers corporations? Are your customers other startups? Are your customers consumers? And what do they care about? What data are they giving you? Are they giving you their own personal information or just their own photos, where it's not maybe as much of a sensitivity of, you know, security, but what about loss? What if you lost the data, right? So think about who are your customers and what do they care about, what laws and regulations you have to comply with. I have to throw that out there because that's a lot of why we get involved with the startups that we get involved with, is because they realize, oh crap, we might have PCI. We don't want to have PCI. We might have PCI. Help us. So, you know, you have to think about what laws, regulations around privacy requirements, data requirements you might have, and then what are your worst case security kind of nightmares? So again, think about what's the worst thing that can happen to you. Are you a service that's based on availability, and that's number one over everything else? Or are you handling sensitive data for your customers, and protecting that data is paramount, and that's more important than response time. So you have to prioritize that and really think about what would be the worst thing that could happen that would affect your ability to grow and to adapt and to just be successful as a viable company. So with those in mind, let's go back to our friends over here, analyze this or analyze that, whatever I called it. You've already seen this before, but now I've customized this a little bit, and I have a lot of detail on here. I'm going to hop around a little bit. We're doing pretty good. We're doing well on time, so I'll probably focus on this slide for the next 5 or 6 minutes and have a wrap-up slide and some questions. So in security governance, this particular company, here's some things we put in place. For risk management, we didn't have to go do a crazy, in-depth risk assessment. But we do have, and I'll say we, because I was helping them for like 6 months, so I feel like I'm part of them. We have a monthly security meeting between myself as security, the CTO, and the system admin. And we talk about a few things. This is only a half-hour meeting once a month. Are there any new risks that we want to log in our risk log? Are there any incidents that we should discuss? And are there any new customer requests? Has our big corporate customer come at us again with any new requests that will require security to either consider or security to implement? And just that checkpoint of having that formal meeting, discussing those items, taking minutes, putting them in a log, it literally takes an hour a month total. Really ticks the box and allows you to tell your customers and other people that you are proactive about security and that you are thinking about it and you have a forum and a way to track and monitor this. So it's something pretty simple, but it works. And another thing that we put in place is obviously security policies. We had to write security policies. And part of that is because from a compliance perspective, they did make a choice to become SOC 2 compliant, which is the old, it's one of the new forms of the old SAS 70, SSA 16. It's called SOC 2, and it's for service providers and service organizations. Now that's an optional auditing standard, optional compliance, but they thought it was the right strategic choice to be able to go to their Fortune X100 customer and say, I know we're small, and I know you're giving us your information, I know we're responding to your security and privacy questionnaires, but look, now we have a shiny badge of certification, and you can have more faith in us. And it actually really has helped them expand into other areas of their customer. Let's see. Also, training. So security training can be a headache for a lot of people. What we put in place there is I designed some training. It probably took me about, I would say 10 hours for security and 10 hours for privacy, because I customize it. I customize the training to their policies and their processes. I didn't just tell them, make secure passwords. I mean, I said, here's what we require of you. Here's the systems that you use. Here's the systems that can enforce it. Here's the systems that can't enforce it. So we're asking you, please, to voluntarily comply. I mean, we were honest in the training about here's what we want you to do actively in your job about security. I delivered it a half-hour security, half-hour privacy, and a half-hour session each, in person to a group like this, and then they video recorded me, and then they host it and post it internally so that now when new employees come on board, they have to sit there for 1 hour and watch me talk, just like you're watching me talk. And that's our security training. I mean, it wasn't that hard. And it could be better. They do, I would agree, I was the first to agree, they need better secure coding practice training for their developers. That will be the next step in their maturity. But for right now, they have something. So that even their office manager and even their new marketing guy that they just hired has an understanding of the basics. And then the developers, we were able to talk honestly about encryption and why we're having certain encryption requirements and for some people and not others, and it produced dialogue. So that's just an example of some of the things that can be done in a somewhat feasible time frame to not just meet these requirements, but to have an answer for what are you doing about how you govern security. So I probably won't have time to go into all these areas, but is there any one of these you want me to talk about more than others? Pick one. Yeah.
I was interested in the asset tagging.
Oh, yeah.
Now we're in the BYOD world, and is that really sustainable to keep putting
Yeah.
on everywhere?
No, they do allow personal devices. What they don't allow, one of the things we put in place while I was there was making sure people had frickin' pins on their phones, and I went around and I was like, clicking on everyone's iPads and iPhones and shaming them when they didn't have a passcode or a pin. So what they've done for asset management is, at least for their physical assets in their corporate offices of desktop laptops, things like that, external hard drives, they have asset tags on them. They're tracking them. They know who they've been assigned to. They didn't have that before, because you know what? A year ago there were 10 people in the same office, and now there are 25 people and they're growing. So that's the first step. As far as the BYOD, they do allow access to email on their phones, but encrypted. They do have encrypted email, I believe. I'm trying to remember, for if they're exchanging customer information, and those files by policy, company policy, not enforced via BYOD, cannot be stored locally or anything like that on personal devices. So there's a lot more room to improve, but they've come a long way. And that's something else that's important to mention. For a startup of whatever size, you can't change culturally too drastically too fast. If security is not your business and you're trying to put in place a lot of security controls and processes and practices, there's only so much you can make people change about their day-to-day job all at once. So you do have to be pragmatic about what you can put in place in a realistic time frame. Make sure that's operationally effective before you start putting more things in place. And most customers, most auditing companies, most business partners are reasonable about that and will recognize that, unless there's some basic critical controls that you're just refusing to put in place. But you can have a story about that. Let's see, what else? So from the technical operations management, even security incident management, another thing they did is they hired someone to be a system administrator, and that's who I worked with very closely over the course of it was 3 months intensively and then a couple months just here and there, where we would kind of build a strategy about what we're going to put in place, and he would go and execute on that. And he was writing scripts to make sure that there was logging and auditing done. He was making sure that there was antivirus on the servers. We had this whole long list of here's the gaps that not just our customers are asking of us, but we know is the right thing to do. How can we put something in place now? Another key thing, I know I'm hopping all over the place, I'm just kind of thinking out loud. We built this periodic information security checklist. And so they have this list to know about what they should do on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, 6-monthly, annual basis to follow with their own policies. Because it's great to write policies and they sit on your wiki somewhere. No one ever looks at them, and then you don't follow them. And especially if your job is to operate your security processes and you don't have the ability to automate everything yet, it's helpful to have that checklist that you can look at just every day and every week, every Friday, and say, oh, that's right, today I have to go back and check all the admin access and make sure that nothing looks funny. We do it manually there. Yep.
So I've worked for small companies and big companies. It's impossible. In my mind, it's impossible to protect software. Employees feel like if they're going to be efficient, they're going to fix some software source code. And I don't see any way to protect that than just trusting the people that they hire or somehow trying to watermark it so they can prove something important later.
I don't have an opinion about that, but does anyone else have an answer to that? Or a response to?
Please repeat the question.
Oh, sure. The question was that he doesn't see how you can ever really protect your source code without just trusting your employees to not locally save it or take pieces home, or without maybe watermarking it or doing something, how do you absolutely protect your source code? That was a question, correct? That's why we have what? Lawyers. Yeah, there is the threat of lawsuits and whatnot. Yep, yeah.
I've heard of people for contractors they don't trust setting up an all VDI environment.
All VDI, yeah.
You can't really you can download screenshots.
Right.
You can't absolutely protect against your employees. All you can do is make it so that it's really blatant and deliberate if they actually do take it.
What do you mean? So you say you can't protect your own employees, but blatant and deliberate?
Against your employees. All you can do is make it so that it's really obvious to everybody that they were acting improperly when they have obtained a copy because they had to bypass the control. Which helps you when you have to fire.
Yeah. So you have to punitive measures for your employees, basically. There's another approach too. We are at time, correct? No. Oh, we have 10 minutes? Oh, freaking me out, man. Oh, there's going to be like a hook that's going to appear over on the side. Okay. Yeah, I didn't remember how long I had. Okay. Oh, yeah?
Ask security questions during the improvement phase.
During which phase? Which phase? Sorry.
So when you're
Oh, yeah.
so you know that you start up Synapse, you ask security questions because you can always train after the fact.
Right.
But
Right. So the question is, do startups ever take the opportunity to ask security questions of their developers before they hire them? Honestly, I've only really seen that when they are themselves a security product company, right? They're already security savvy themselves. Otherwise, no, I haven't seen it. I mean, they could, they should, that'd be great. But they're usually just looking for, I mean, if any of us want a different job right now, we can go out and get a different job, right? There's plenty of work out there, and we're all fighting for talent, and they're just looking for people who can code. Let's see, what else? So, I know we're actually coming, well, sorry, I could talk about some of these other areas, but I actually am going to go to this slide, next slide. So, in terms of something that's a little bit actionable or something to think about, it's sort of a repeat of the strategy question, but it's, again, your next steps. If you're at a startup or you're ever going to work at a startup, you have any role to play in this whole process, is to identify what your customers, or you could replace that with investors too. Again, if you're going for investor funding and they're going to care about some of this as well, what they care about, because those are the people you're going to have to answer to. Customers are going to come to you and they're going to want the right to audit. They're going to want to have language in their contracts about requiring you to do certain things in terms of encryption with their data. And so, preemptively think about that, but also be open, and willing to listen to your customers and what they want. They're the ones who are paying for your products. They're the ones who are giving you your revenue stream. That's what you should focus some of your concerns about. They might not know enough, but they'll know what they care about. And don't put your security head in the sand. It's that don't run away from these. I mean, those lists of controls, any of the things we're all talking about, they're not going anywhere. So getting ahead of the curve and putting something in place and starting a dialogue, and you have to start somewhere. Prepare for failing and fixing. Nothing's going to be perfect. And also, if you're trying to put stuff in place because you're limited on funds and budget and resources, et cetera, a half-assed job might end up being a half-assed job and not only half-assed work. So be prepared to try something out, play with it, fix it, try again. That's okay. We're all human. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time around. And then kind of taking something from PCI, that mentality of limit your scope of where your sensitive information sits and who touches it. Because if you do that, you might be 25 people now, but once you're 100 people and you have a whole bunch of marketing and sales people who never need to touch any of your source code, why would you have an open network where they could get access to it? Figure that stuff out from the beginning in terms of how can we segment the things that are important to us and our customers early on, so that as we grow, we can keep that protection and let the rest of it become a mess if it's not that important. And that's pretty much it. So I know I couldn't get through all of the examples on that last slide, but is there anything else that people want to suggest or ask right here?
So another question, so a lot of security tools are really expensive.
A lot of security tools are expensive, yes.
So the startup might not have the budget for that. So does it
Correct.
hurt the startup not to have those security tools that are expensive?
There are a lot of free or cheap security tools that you can start to use. They won't have all the functionality or all the customization of the enterprise level tools, but you can start using Snort. You can start using, what's it called, Security Onion? Is that what it's called? Or something like that as well. If you're trying to focus on what you want to do for your IPS and your logging and your monitoring, there's tools out there that are not super expensive and don't take that long to at least spin up and figure out and start to play with. There's preset, free rule sets out there.
They have a disadvantage that they don't have the expensive.
No, I mean, okay, even like the huge companies I work with, like Fortune 500 companies I work with, I mean, they buy the big expensive tools and they don't spend the time to figure out how to use them in the first place. And then they say it doesn't work, and then next year they go and buy another expensive tool because they think they're fixing the problem with expensive tools. That's why I'm very much adamant and proponent of understand what your process needs to be, and then over time and with tools, you can start to automate those components of whatever your process or your methodology is. Yeah?
Say 2 or 3 sort of egregious over and over again things you explain to company after company after company after company. What are the top 2 or 3, like, you're telling everybody the same thing, kind of bullet points are?
Yeah, so for startups, one of them is definitely restricting access internally, right? Because when they started out with 5 guys, they all had access to everything, and then they're 10, and then there's 15, and then they're 25, and I'm not saying you have to put all this formal, crazy, enforced change management in place or things like that, but too often, too many people have access to everything or have admin access. They just don't need it anymore. And then you want to take it away from them, like, oh, and they act like, well, wait, well, I still need that. No, they don't. So I mean, I see that at startups, I see that a lot. I also just see a lack of self-discipline. And again, it doesn't have to be anything too fancy about what you're trying to be disciplined about. But that example of doing that monthly security meeting, that solves a lot of problems. But just even sitting down for half an hour to talk about security, they act like, I can't do that, we're too busy, we don't have time. And it's like, okay, it's a discipline issue. Sorry, I want to go ahead and answer your question. Yeah.
So you mentioned semiconductors and security as sort of a selling point.
Yeah.
Do you have any good examples of how some companies are doing that?
Well, sure. I mean, if you're, I guess it depends what your product is, right? So, and I mean, if you're a security product company, you're obviously using security as a selling point because that's the service that you're offering is security itself, right? I guess, sorry, which? Well, that's why, yeah, and that's why this particular company, for example, went with the SOC 2 compliance, because they wanted to have a distilled stamp of approval I mean, you can poke holes in that standard. I'm not saying it's perfect, but they wanted to have the auditable, external, objective. Yep. I'm done. I'm cut off. Sorry. I'm taking it seriously. Thank you for your attention and your time.